Great. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, especially Brenda. Thanks for making this connection this morning. Um, it's interesting. I, over the last couple of weeks, have presented this particular webinar in the recovery community centers here in Connecticut, both in Willimantic, Hartford, and Bridgeport, with very positive response. I did a few tweaks to it to add to it because I'm constantly learning how to actively listen while I'm interviewing to motivate change. And I think that's the real cool thing about the work that we get to do. We get to develop an art that keeps moving over time, especially as we address these issues with other people. So here's an offering that I hope that will be helpful to look at listening actively while interviewing to motivate change. Right off the bat, if you see that little black box up there, it says, the biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. And I know for myself in my humble effort to lend power and to help other people, that clearly can be a barrier to my ability to actively listen. So again, we teach best what we most need to learn, and clearly this is something that's an ongoing learning process for me, especially as I find myself in my efforts to help at this point, really working with adolescents. And I find that working with adolescents, listening actively while interviewing and asking good questions in a humble effort to not necessarily motivate change, but to help them to think about things in a way they may have thought about it before, these particular tools are very powerful and very helpful. So let's move along. Listening actively while interviewing motivate change. Over the next hour, we will identify how mastering practicing active listening skills and techniques help motivate change and growth. Notice I say not only change in the process of recovery, but also talk about growth in human beings, and again, more particularly growth in adolescence. I'm one who's constantly thinking about and appreciating the fact that many of us get stuck in adolescence, especially when we have problems in living later on in life. So the ability to think about growth through adolescence and personal growth are critical to any process. And active listening to motivate change is a clear part of that process for me. Over the next hour, we will describe the components of an active listening model that includes questioning skills as an essential communication skill in working with others. This comes from actually a free site called smashingwinery.com, and that really helped me to think about active listening. It's geared towards helping people help other people to work together. So I think you'll see the model that can be very helpful. And finally, we're going to explore motivational interviewing as a resource of questioning/interviewing for change. Again, having done this over the last couple of weeks with live audiences, we had a nice conversation about motivational interviewing and focusing on the word interviewing. Let's not lose sight of we are interviewing people, asking good questions, gaining a sense of what they're thinking, getting a sense of what they're wanting. That's an interview process that I'm connecting with more and more. But also I appreciate that any interview process, I believe to be most helpful, I suggest be a two-way street. So we're interviewing to motivate change. And active listening is a big part of this process. This is the art and science of coaching recovery that we constantly talk about in the Recovery Coach Academy. If you look on the left-hand side, the science of what to do, that's what's offered in the Recovery Coach Academy. And what we're going to focus on today are three clear concepts that come out of this science of what to do as we wonder, how do we develop our own art on how to do this? And this is an ongoing process, I believe, that we get, that as we practice, we get better and better and better. So when we look at this particular art and science of coaching recovery, we're going to focus on active listening today. We're going to focus on motivational questioning or motivational interviewing. And these are both skills and strategies or the science that uses to support recovery. I perceive your responsibility as a part of looking at this webinar and absorbing whatever information, whatever science comes out of it for you as I describe what is my own evolving art of coaching recovery with active listening and motivational questioning be the key components that I'm looking today as being the science. I want you to think about how do I do this? And not necessarily the way that I do it or the way that anyone else does it, but it's about you developing your own art of making this work. And if you notice, between science and art is wonder. I've heard that science and art meet in wonder. And the art is how you listen and ask good questions. And the science are the lessons, the training, the knowledge, and the wisdom regarding listening and asking good questions. And I'm just wondering, how well do you listen actively and interview to motivate change? Throughout the course of this particular webinar, Brenda, if you have any questions or comments, please type them in and I will respond to them as you put them up there. Other than that, I'll move along. CCAR Recovery Coach Academy Fundamentals, the three-leg stool that we're constantly referring to. And this particular piece asked is, how well do you listen? And again, folks, let's tell the truth without blaming or judging ourselves, because we are all in a process of practicing these particular concepts so that we can be a better, utilize them better in our efforts to help others as well as to help ourselves. One of the things I want to posit right up front that I'm constantly thinking about, we are all learners, doers, and teachers. As you learn this information, as you practice this information with the people that you practice it with, whether they be recoverees, whether they be adolescents, whether they be people that you care about, that you're making an effort to support, or have better conversations that matter with them, think about your ability to learn this information and teach it to someone else. We teach best what we most need to learn. It's interesting, as I continue to do these webinars, as I continue to share what I'm learning, I continue to learn. And I learned a lot from doing this particular webinar. So how well do you actively listen is the question that we want you to think about up front as you begin to think about your own art of helping. So with that in mind, think about these true-false questions about your own listening skills. And please, I'll go through them slow enough so that if you choose to, you can give your own self a true or false. The sharing of that information can be with myself or with someone else, but clearly you want to think about this and talk with someone else about how you are assessing and thinking about your capacity, your ability to listen well. True-false. When listening, I never assume that I know what the other person is going to say. True-false. I do not interrupt others when they are talking. True-false. I do not focus on what I'm going to say while the other person is talking. That's a tough one. True-false. I make eye contact when listening to the other person. We had a conversation about making eye contact while listening to another person in the Bridgeport Recovery Center. It was very powerful and very impactful. And appreciate the fact that as we're learning these tools to help other people, sometimes something as what we think is simple as making eye contact may be a challenge for someone seeking to help another person. And again, by not making eye contact, people walk away with different perceptions about one's caring or one's focus. But clearly the ability to talk this through and to make an honest effort to make the best eye contact we can is essential. And if we struggle with eye contact, that's a nice piece of self-disclosure that helps another person to know that this isn't easy stuff even for those who are looking to guide other people. True-false. I stop all other activities when I listen to the other person. True-false. I focus on what the person is saying while he or she is talking. Simply stated, we want to say that's a no-brainer, and yet sometimes it's not. True-false. I do not make judgments on what is being said. It's another one. I used to always believe that I worked hard not to make judgments, but when I get honest with myself, judgments tend to leak through. Judgments leak through. The work becomes that's middle leg work. My work is to not let those judgments overly impact the relationship that I'm building. So much of the work is to work with people without blaming or judging them. And that's practice. That takes a lot of practice. True, false. I listen carefully so the other person does not have to repeat the message. True, false. I carry on one conversation at a time. True, false. I ask questions without interrupting if I am not sure I understand what is being said. There's a very delicate piece here in developing your own art. Sometimes people may ramble, sometimes people may seem to go on, and we may have a difficult time finding a place to insert our questions. I think the ability to make better eye contact, the ability to demonstrate a leaning forward, an ability to have a querying look on my face many times allows me to make that break into their conversation. And then there are other times I just give them a big fine, excuse me, may I say. True, false. I believe I'm a good listener. As well as you might believe you're a good listener, how are you a good listener? And how are you not a good listener? And again, folks, this webinar offers an opportunity. I know in many ways, we do a lot of thinking and learning about listening, but it's an ongoing process, and we're ongoing learning in the process of this process. I'm going to take a pause right in here because I see Brenda typing, and it's a natural pause. I'll give you an opportunity to ask your question before I move on, Brenda, or make your statement. Interrupting a long-winded sharing is my area of needing help. I'm afraid I'll forget a question. Yeah, and Brenda, I give myself permission to write down my question. Or, if the person has been long-winded, long is enough, sometimes I'll have to say. In many ways, if I'm fear I'm going to forget my question, then maybe I'm not listening as well as I need to listen because my questions are based upon what I'm hearing. In those cases, Brenda, I would err on the side of helping that other person the best way that you can. Many people appreciate their long-windedness and appreciate that an interruption, not a rude interruption, can be helpful. And I hope that response is a helpful one. In your area of needing help, it's about you in that point because you want to offer what you want to offer. Sometimes up front, I'll talk about the fact that, if I have a pressing question, I'll give you a signal that I'd like to ask a question. But any of those points that might help you, I hope they help you. But great question and great comment. And keep them coming. As you start typing, I'll give you the opportunity to ask for what you need because this is about you and not about me. Thanks, Brenda. As I think about effective listening, I think about listening is hard work. Effective listening is more than just a skill. Effective listening is also a matter of attitude. To be an effective listener, we must accept people for who and what they are, not what you want them to be. It's so much of meeting people where they're at. It's so much of the constant reminder. It's about that person. It's not about me. I am presenting myself. I am present in this conversation that I hope that matters with this person with an attitude of gratitude that they're sharing with me, but also clearly the attitude of treating them as the resource that they are. So it's more than a skill in the sense that I do something. In the process of performing this particular effective listening skill, I am also being something. I am being a resource. I am being respectful. I am being a person who is focused on what the person I'm sitting with and listening to needs versus my own needs. So effective listening, a lot of work, a lot of focus, a lot of patience, and clearly a matter of attitude. Active listening means removing all distractions, listening to the speaker's signs and sounds, paying attention to what they're saying as well as what they're not saying, paying attention to their body language, their characteristics. All of my senses come into play when I'm actively listening. And actively listening means feeding back what you have understood. feeding back what you have understood. We'll give you more awareness of how that feedback might take its form and how you might begin to formulate that feedback. But these are very key points of active listening that we'll follow up on through the breadth of this particular webinar. Some of the barriers that are attached to active listening may be something like our ability to overreach and underreach. What that really speaks to is overreaching involves giving meanings that go far beyond what the person has expressed by stating interpretations that come from me versus them. Underreaching involves missing the meaning of what is being said because it does not agree with my own view of how things might be. So that's middle leg stool stuff. I can overreach or I can underreach. I can give meaning that goes beyond what the person meant, or I can give meaning that's based upon what I mean and certainly does not reach the peak of what the person is stating. It could be tempting to seek confirmation of my own views, and I may need to make a conscious effort to avoid doing so. That's middle leg stool stuff. That's my stuff that has no play and opportunity in the work that we're doing. When you think about long-windedness, think about giving very long and complex responses breaks the flow of conversations and makes it less likely that I'll gain an understanding of the other person's thinking or talking. In many ways, that's me taking the spotlight when that's not mine to have. Unsuitable responses may take the form of things like asking a direct question when the most appropriate response is usually just the answer rather than asking for any deeper meaning. For example, what are we likely to get some extra resources? The best answer is usually a direct one. For example, we're going to get 2 people to meet every week. I know next Wednesday. Clearly, the ability to offer appropriate responses is the ability to respond to what the person is asking for. If I pretend comprehension, then I'm acting as if I understand what they're saying when I really don't, and that's not a good thing to do. I need to be genuine and honest in my relationship. Again, barriers may be complex responses, physical such as chairs or tables, or cultural based upon the person's own comfortability with seating, but also culture with eye contact and a lot of the things we learn in our cultural responsiveness courses. So again, think about the barriers and think about the barriers that may be more specific as well as unique to people that you might be working with or working for. These are the active listening components that comes through in this model. I really like them. The first one is active listening as a reflective technique. Another one is the listener's orientation as they're actively listening. And another one is the questioning skills that will, move into also talking about motivational interviewing as a prime requisite for questioning. Many of the barriers that, we looked at earlier to active listening include physical and cultural, such as noisy environment, strong regional accent, or in terms of, reference with the other person. Also the barriers that might be created, or if we're not careful, are inappropriate nonverbal cues, taking the spotlight, stereotyped reactions, inappropriate responses, pretending understanding, overreaching along with. I go back to that because appreciate the barriers as you appreciate your own orientation in your relationship as you actively listen. So these are the key components of active listening that come through for this model. And I really liked this model because I experienced it as really combining my thinking about active listening with my thinking and my wondering about how does that actively listening complement my ability to ask good questions? How does my ability to actively listen complement and charge my ability to interview for motivation? I hope that helps. As an active listener, is neutral, as much as possible non-judgmental, and engaged throughout the conversation, interview, dialogue. Neutral, meaning that I'm there for them. It's about them. My middle leg stool stuff gets compartmentalized. It's non-judgmental as well as non-blaming. Angeles Arion and her fourfold way of living that helps me to think about how do we work together and build the best relationships that we possibly can, talks about the way of the problem solver. And we're really talking about problem solving. The way of the visionary, which is also the way of the problem solver, is the ability to tell the truth without blame or judgment. In my non-judgmental attitude, as an active listener, I'm also focused on when I do have the opportunity to respond, when I do ask what I hope to be good questions, I'm going to ask those questions without blaming or judging. Not only not blaming or judging the person I'm asking the questions of, but not blaming or judging myself in relation to the questions that I'm asking. Whenever I find myself blaming or judging myself about asking a question, it may be a fear on my part to ask a question that I think might be sensitive. However, I work real hard not to offend or demean, and I work real hard to treat people as resources. So in that process, I may say to someone, I'm going to tell you the truth, or I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not blaming and I'm not judging you, as I'm trying not to blame or judge myself for asking this question. Yet, here goes. And that seems to help. I liked this one, and I hesitated to put it up, but I hope you can see it. And again, once you get the PowerPoint, pay close attention. These are degrees of active listening. As an active listener, we can repeat what we're hearing. We repeat what we're perceiving the person to be saying. We're clearly paying attention. If you notice, if you go across those 3 degrees of active listening, perceiving shows up in each one of them, paying attention shows up in every one of them, and remembering shows up in every one of them. I think much like you mentioned earlier, Brenda, sometimes we are challenged to remember what we hear. And I find the more I struggle to remember, the more I forget. So I'm more appreciating what I'm perceiving, what I'm hearing. I remember what I remember. And if I don't remember, I may repeat the message exactly the same as the words of the speaker to see if what I'm saying is remembered. Or in paraphrasing, I perceive, I pay attention, I remember, I think, I reason relative to what I'm hearing and remembering, and then I share the message using similar words and phrase arrangement as the speaker. So I paraphrase, I hope, what they're saying, again in my effort, if I'm forgetting or if I'm not remembering or if I've lost my question, so that I'm hearing again what they have to say. And Brenda, there's another one of those points that helps me to get back what I think I may have lost as I asked that long, as I listened and listened and didn't get my opportunity to interject. So we got repeating, paraphrasing, reflecting, and we're going to talk about reflective listening in a little bit. But reflecting is perceiving, paying attention, remembering, thinking and reasoning, but also sharing the message using my words and my sentence structure. It's an opportunity to share the truth without blame or judgment as I'm experiencing what I'm hearing. So those are degrees of active listening, and I think they all work as we actively listen. I think as we're beginners in this process, that repeating was always what I did. But over time, that repeating helped me to do a better job of paraphrasing, and over time, the ability to repeat and paraphrase has certainly given me a better opportunity to be more reflective in my listening. Active listening needs you to put your own concerns, attitudes, and ideas to one side while listening to the speaker. Again, middle leg of the stool stuff. Compartmentalizing it to the middle leg of the stool. Active listening needs you to remove distractions so you can observe conscious and unconscious signs that the person who's speaking is offering. And active listening needs you so that you can identify or discern the true meaning from the speaker's words. This particular format, this particular style of thinking about active listening has really opened me up to the concept of an effort to discern the meaning in the speaker's words. Think about how powerful that will be in our humble effort to help people to be motivated towards change. The ability to discern what we believe is the true meaning sometimes may be the first time that person is really getting the true meaning of what they're saying. It involves the ability to help them to connect the dots. It involves them the ability to hear from another soul what might be coming or emanating from their own soul. So it's a really powerful tool to discern the true meaning from the speaker's words and then repeat it, paraphrase it, or reflect on it back to them. Very powerful. And again, this has been a real valuable lesson I've learned in preparing for this particular webinar. The reflective listening technique that I talked about a little earlier involves reflecting back to the speaker what it is you believe they mean. Let me check this out with you. I am experiencing you saying this, and is that to say that you mean this? It's a clarification of the meaning of what has been heard. It increases our understanding, and the advantage of this reflective technique is that it increases your understanding. It helps the speaker, to clarify their own thoughts. In many ways, it helps the speaker to connect the dots. And it reassures the speaker that you are interested, listening, and focused on what they are saying. These are advantages of the reflective technique of this active listening process. Brenda, you're writing. I will receive your writing. Welcome, Gerald. I'm glad that you're here. Can you hear me, Gerald? And again, just as Brenda is doing now, as I'm moving through this webinar, as I experience the typing that comes up on my window, I will give you the opportunity to share what you're typing at the moment that it's typing. Clarifying the intent of the conversation seems to help too. Sometimes people like the idea of being heard. Other times they truly want to get your opinion on the matter. That's true. How frustrated people get when they ask questions in the Recovery Coach Academy, and Phil and I will put the question back on them. Yeah, it is nice to talk about the intent. Great point, Brenda. Clarifying the intent of the conversation seems to help too. The intent of this conversation, in my humble effort to actively listen to what you have to say, is an effort to help you to think about things in a way you may not have thought about them before. With that intent in mind, my own opinions may come through, but they're only my own opinions relative to the content of what you are saying. Might be something that I'm saying. Hello, Gerald. Good morning. I guess you can hear us. Thank you for being here. I hope that helps I thank you for that point, Brenda, and I hope what I said adds to it. So this reflective techniques offers us an opportunity to really help the person to tease out their meaning. So it really helps the person to identify what matters to them and how those matters are being addressed. The qualities of a listener orientation was really interesting, Think about your orientation as a listener. In your orientation as a listener, do you practice acceptance? Do you practice empathy? Do you practice concreteness? Do you practice congruence? Do you offer your undivided attention? And do you practice respect? When I looked at this particular image, I felt the need to add some content to it to help us to tease out what these qualities of a listener orientation are saying. Under the concept of respect, as a quality of a listening orientation, respect means thinking well of every person rather than judging them according to a preconceived standard of personal worth. Really talks about cultural responsiveness. More importantly, it talks about treating people as resources versus objects. Who am I to judge or their value or their worth? It's about respecting everyone who sits in front of me and offering everyone the opportunity to utilize the science that I am offering them as my art in ways that are helpful for them. Empathy is posited in this particular model is an awareness of another person's feelings that develops naturally out of active listening. Again, this is one of those pieces that surprised me and I really like. You know, I thought about empathy in a large context, and we talk about empathy a lot when we talk about motivational interviewing. And yet this awareness of another person's feelings that develops naturally out of active listening is a demonstration of the power of this particular model for me. And it really speaks to how I want to enhance my actively listening so that the feelings that the other person have are clearly within my radar. Concreteness speaks to focusing on specifics rather than vague generalities. Concreteness offers the opportunity to focus on specifics rather than vague generalities. This refers to things like, for example, someone says, somebody's always late coming in. Or someone has been, either I can say someone is always late coming in, or I can always say someone has been more than one day late on 3 out of the last 3 times I've asked them to come in. The first of these was a vague statement, while the second one is more concrete. Often, a person who has a problem will avoid painful feelings by being abstract or impersonal and will say things like, it supports me to be, they might be vague about what they really need, when in reality they may be afraid to talk about what they really need. Maybe they're not trusting that I care about what they need. So as much as possible, if we can help people to focus on specifics, then the vague generalities that may come as a result of either they don't know what they don't know, they haven't uncovered that part, or their fear of uncovering something like that. The ability of helping people, our ability to focus on being more concrete is very helpful. Another quality of listening orientation is congruence. And congruence really speaks about openness, frankness, and genuineness in your role as a listener. Be open, be frank, be genuine as you listen. And undivided attention, I think, speaks for itself. Qualities of a listener orientation. Again, this is a new piece for me and a very valuable piece as I move forward. Recovery Coach Academy fundamentals shown again, that 3-legged stool. At this point, how well do you ask questions? How well do you ask questions? Think about that. How well do you ask questions? Prior to my involvement in recovery coaching, prior to my involvement in teaching in the Recovery Coach Academy, I think for years I experienced myself, and I had been told by people that I ask good questions. And I think the good questions that I've been able to ask over time come as a result of my willingness to listen, to care, and always having the desire to treat people as resources. I wholeheartedly work through the concept of the person that I'm sitting with and having a conversation that hopefully matters to them is the expert on their experience. I utilize whatever skills I develop in order to develop a relationship with that person so that they can share what they need to share as a result of helping me to know more about who they are. It is an honor and a privilege to sit with someone, have them talk about their lives, their fears, their concerns, and their efforts to change. And I am a person who respects that and treats them as much as I can as a resource, which in line gives me an opportunity, I think, to ask good questions. Some point, I think I'm going to develop a webinar where we just have an opportunity to do some interchange. And I like to do it when I go into the collaborative learning experiences that I do in the 3 recovery community centers here in Connecticut, because I have an opportunity to give people an opportunity to think about, to verbalize concepts within the training, and I ask them to look at the model that I'm offering them as a good listener, I hope. I have enough confidence in my ability to ask questions to help people think that I do ask good questions and ask them to look at me as a model of that. Again, listener orientations. In asking questions, don't use I, my, or me. That makes it about me and not about them. It's about changing from your perspective of what can I do for this person to, as I'm actively listening, how do I see this person? Moving from what can I do for this person? Because that sets my mind to spin it in answering questions and thinking about what I'm going to do versus just being present and being absorbent of how do I see this person? How am I experiencing this person? And at some level, how are they experiencing me? And then moving to the perspective of the speaker, how does the speaker see themselves as they're sharing and talking with me as I'm listening to them? How does the speaker see themselves as I'm listening to them? And how does the speaker view their situation? See, if I focus on those two pieces or those three pieces, how do I see this person? How does the person see themselves? And how does a person view their situation? I'm focused on their work, which puts me in a position to ask good questions to have them think about how their work can move through. Got a little bit of feedback in the back, folks. I apologize for that. Let me see if I can't get rid of it. Oh, gosh. Okay, I think I've got it. Sorry for the interruption. Sometimes computers do things you don't want them to do. Let's move on to the next page. Questioning enables you to foster commitment with the person that you're working with, focus their attention as well as your attention, because the ability to ask good questions, the ability to pay attention to it as heart and meaning for the speaker. Questioning enables us to elicit new ideas. Again, I want people to think about things in a way they haven't thought about them. That's a process of eliciting new ideas and connecting some dots. And clearly, questioning enables you to encourage exploration as well as encourage self-discovery. Recovery is a process of empowerment and self-discovery. Asking good questions is a significant resource, a significant tool in helping a person self-discover. Types of questions that one might posit are open questions. Those are questions that cannot be answered with a yes or a no. Closed questions are questions that can be answered with a yes or no. Probing questions, paraphrasing, hypothetical questions, leading questions in an effort to encourage more talking and more thinking about the particular topic or subject. And we looked at reflective questionings. Any questions about the questions? Because we're going to talk more about questions and questioning as we move through the towards the end of this webinar. Excellent. Let's think about motivational interviewing. I assume that you've had some experience in working with, studying, thinking about motivational interviewing. This is an opportunity for you to add to that information. Motivational interviewing is a technique to help people recognize and do something about their present or potential problems. For me, motivational interviewing, the ability to interview as I'm actively listening to motivate, is to motivate towards action, to motivate towards following through, to motivate towards getting off the fence and getting past the ambivalence. The primary goal of motivational interviewing is to assist individuals moving through the stages of change. And again, the stages of change model that we use in the Recovery Coach Academy gives you a clear indication of what those stages are, what are the prospects of moving through those stages, what might be some of the person who we're encouraging to move through the stages, some of the barriers or some of the thinking that goes into their challenges of moving through the stages, and what is our role in helping them to move through the stages. And if you look at our role in helping them to move through the stages, they clearly imply, they clearly offer us information that motivational interviewing, while we're actively listening, is a clear resource in doing this work well, helping people to change, to the stages of change. Motivational interviewing is particularly useful with individuals who are reluctant or ambivalent about changing. And motivational interviewing is intended to help resolve ambivalence and to motivate the individual to pursue rather than avoid change. Some of those concepts will come through as we do a bit of review of motivational interviewing. The 4 fundamental processes of motivational interviewing, as identified by Miller in 2010, are the process of engaging a person, i.e. the relational foundation. It's all about the relationship. If we build relationships that help versus destroy or enable, we're doing well. Process of motivational interviewing is about focusing, is strategic centering. One engaging and focusing can take place in all types of psychotherapy. For us, it has a real valuable piece in our efforts to coach recovery. It's strategic centering. It's strategies to help the person to focus on what's helpful to focus on. Strategic centering. It's evoking. It's a conscious choice. It's helping the person to make a choice about what it is they want to be and what it is they want to do. It's bringing that out of them. Evoking is a bringing out of. That's a way that the process helps to motivate change. And it's planning. It's implementation. It's an intentional implementation. Combination of a specific plan and a stated intention to do that plan. It's highly predictive of change. If the person's working on the plan, then they're working towards change. If they're not working towards change. And that is common fodder for our discussions that matter as the person sits with me and we talk about their motivation to change, their motivation to follow through on their plan, their motivation to follow through on their goals, hopefully their SMART goals. The OARS is another specific basic skills of motivational interviewing opportunity. OARS is open questions, affirmations, again, this concept of reflective listening comes up, and summaries of what I'm hearing. Appreciate that motivational interviewing is not a series of techniques for doing therapy, but instead a way of being with recoveries, clients, patients, adolescents. I like this particular statement. It's not about the techniques, folks. It's about the art of utilizing these techniques to be with recoveries, to be with adolescents, to be with people who are seeking change in a way that brings value to their experience and to our experience. Brenda's typing. I will wait for her typing. Motivational interviewing is a way of being with recoveries. It's a way of being with other people. And that has always been a challenge for me in my own life. And again, the reminder, the learning of being able to interview for motivation has helped me to better settle in being with other people. It can be hard for some to get used to when they're used to being just told what to do. Yes, it is. And yet, Brenda, it is critical that we get them to get used to it. It's critical to say it's about you, it's not about me. Therefore, let's let this be a way of our relating with each other. I am so desirous of treating you as a resource versus an object who comes in and I deposit information in your head and you go out there and do it rotely or blow it off because it doesn't fit your perception or your perspective of what your change process is about. This is about you. It's not about me. Help me to help it to be about you by being open to this information. Let's have conversations that matter about this information so that you can find your way. Yes, yes, yes. They smile so much, Brenda, and they better respect themselves so much, and I think they trust us so much better as well. Motivational interviewing is expressing empathy, practicing acceptance, reflective listening, and challenging the ambivalence. Developing discrepancy. The client or the recovery rather than the helper presents the arguments for change. Rolling with resistance is avoiding arguing for change. New perspectives are invited and not imposed. And supporting self-efficacy is a person's belief in the possibility of change. This is an important motivator. I ask as that important motivator right up front for every person I meet. I ask them two questions that comes from William Glasser's work in reality therapy years ago. The questions are, is change possible for you? And the second question, after they respond to the first question, are you worth changing? And the more spontaneous they respond to, is change possible for you and are you worth changing, the more clear I believe they are around their ability to change. And it certainly gives me a greater indication of their capacity for change and personal growth. But clearly, the client or the recovery is responsible for choosing and carrying out the change. I'm supporting their efforts by listening actively and asking good questions that hopefully motivate their process through to where they want to take it. Motivational interviewing techniques, moment in review. Rolling with resistance. It's working with the person's resistance versus opposing it. Gerald asks, when applying these lessons of motivational listening, you mentioned earlier, never use certain words that promote self. Yes, it's not about me. When I use I or me, the focus is on me. It may slip through, but clearly there's the constant reminder it's about you, it's not about me. I don't use I don't use me, I don't use myself. It's about them, and I find ways to share or ask those questions without using I or me. And that's a challenge, but it's a nice way of practicing our best way to ask good questions. Good question, Frank. Gerald, I'm sorry. Working with the person's resistance versus opposing it. Balancing the perspective. When I roll with the resistance, we talk about how they're thinking. We can talk about how it might be thought about, and that might balance their perspective on how to think about it or what they might think about. Expressing empathy is identifying and understanding reasons for resistance without judging or blaming. Expressing empathy is creating trust by showing you are with the person. I'm right here with you. Avoiding arguing is avoiding additional resistance for the person. No one wins an argument in this situation. Feelings are not arguable. Carefront, not argue. Carefront is another way of saying confront. It's a gentler, milder way that I've used over time. I'm going to carefront you relative to what I just heard because I care enough about you to have you help me think about what you said, to help me to better understand it, or for you possibly to think about it in a way that might be another way of thinking about it. I carefront you at that moment when I want you to think about something a little bit more deeply. Developing discrepancy, a strategy to create conflict within the person. Motivating change by creating a discrepancy or a difference between the person's present behavior and their goals and values. If they're not doing what they said they're going to do, developing discrepancy is a powerful tool to help them to sort that out. Supporting self-efficacy, which is clearly the road to empowerment, which is so much a part of coaching recovery. Pointing out the positives and the strengths. Praising, congratulating the person for what they are doing to accomplish their goal and their plan. As you see, there's Think we're done? Good. Thank